And it's Thursday, and I have a dildo or a vibrator. I don't know the difference between the two, other than I think one of them needs to be charged. Um, and I don't think this is actually fully charged. But the idea is that one is kind of like a silicone replica of a man's anatomy, and the other is just something to almost stimulate in a way that can almost replicate what sexual intercourse is. So I ended off the last video talking about how to deal with somebody who's an adult walking into maybe their children or somebody who is trying to explore themselves sexually and then reacting, and then what the child's reaction or who the person who's maybe trying to explore themselves sexually should do as somebody who's responding to like this someone who just barged into their room. So the way I'm going to kind of address this is about personal comfort. Because if I'm an adult, for example, and let's assume I'm a parent and I have a 13-year-old, and I just, I knock in, and then as I'm knocking, I'm kind of coming in to the room. Um, I could almost assume that I have this sort of comfort and I don't necessarily have a boundary yet with my kid. So I could just assume, we haven't really discussed what kind of boundaries we want to have with each other around each other yet. So this is going to be kind of like that gray area where between the child and the parent, they have to kind of gauge what's going to be a new way to talk about me growing up. So, as a parent, I might, if I walk in and I see a child masturbating, I might say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then walk out. Right? So the child might feel like embarrassed, or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe something they will have to kind of talk about later. Um, that's maybe something for another video. But my first impression would be, as a parent from a traditional family, would my instinct be to get that child in trouble? And I want to say no, and I hope the answer is no, because that's basically where taboo can sort of form, and that's where people can start to have unresolved around their human body, around their sex or their gender. Um, like, okay, I'm a boy, but I'm not supposed to have these feelings, so now I don't want to identify as a boy. Should I be a girl who's like more demure socially? Like, what am I supposed to understand about this? So all of these things might be going through a child's head. They don't know, right? Their safe spot is their parent. Like, you're my role model. You're supposed to kind of initiate me into becoming an adult. Parents maybe don't have the training for this, nor did they go to school for this, nor do they know, for example, that they're supposed to know this. Sometimes people are just like, well, we grew up, we weren't informed. We just kind of figured it out on our own. And so they just assume, well, going forward, that's what the norm should be. So knowing that now that, in a postmodern world, there's little room for anything to not be discussed or investigated or wanting to be sort of elucidated or brought to light. It's almost like a breath of fresh air. It's almost like, well, thank goodness. Like, there's nothing that's almost like written off as taboo, really. It's just, who am I willing to be trusting with, to open up with, and not have judge me or me try to judge them or anything like that. So, so the first thing was, okay, so I have to first check myself, like, as a parent, if I have young kids still, what what do I want to start thinking about for the future? And then if they do ask me natural questions about their body or like how they see people around them, how do I know how to react? So I think 2 videos ago, I was saying this isn't really a question we need to delay. The question of personal identities around gender, gender fluidity, like, these questions we might assume they will impact us, but they will, because we're in the society, we're in the world. And if they're in one pocket of the world, they're eventually going to spread just because of the nature of the internet. So knowing that already is almost like, okay, so I have to start thinking about this. And then I have to understand my own social group. So if I'm trying to talk about it with my friends, how are they going to respond? And how are they going to almost try to lead me into a way of thinking? So that's why it's almost important always to have your own way of thinking about it first and say, okay, like, I want to maybe do my own research and then think, this is what the common norm is. And then this is what maybe my tradition is. This is maybe the way I grew up. Um, my kids go to this school and they have these kinds of friends. Maybe I need to kind of augment the way I think with what they're going to kind of be growing up into, so that I don't feel like I'm holding him back or her back because of my own upbringing. And then you can start to branch out and say, well, maybe I'll go into like a Facebook group that has like some kind of parenting title or something where this is basically a common um, concern, and then see what the feedback is. and then kind of go from there and actually like talk to actual individuals who are in your life and then see, what would you do if, you found that your child is masturbating? I would want to assume that everyone would be like, oh, it's that time of year. It's kind of tricky. We don't know how to kind of deal with it. Usually we kind of wait for the kids to kind of maybe talk to us about it, or maybe they don't want to because it's just like, it'll make me feel uncomfortable to get awkward. But that's basically where we want to start talking about sexuality and safe sexual practices. I didn't bring a condom because I don't really know that I should be the one to explain how it's used. There's so many YouTube videos that explain the use of like sex toys and how to properly uh, put on a condom. Because I'm not experienced, I don't want to be doing something wrong and then assume that, I'm the authority. Clearly, I have experimented with my own sexuality. And that's kind of one thing that I want to talk about because knowing what to expect. Like I got lube just to say that, sometimes we hold these stigmas around age and what a person should expect around like orgasm and like what's a norm. And if you go into this blindly, like I said before, you might assume that, um, you just might start forming ideas and thoughts that might be disillusioning, but it's not anything like that. It's just you maybe are just not informed enough about maybe the whole idea of intimacy and your body taking time to, just like working out, if you think about it. Um, you have to warm up a little bit before, like your muscles have to kind of be pliable almost. Because if you do something too quickly without your muscles being warm, they're going to snap, and then you'll pull a muscle, and then you'll actually be injured for a while. So all of these things, I don't know if, like at what age they teach them in school, but I figured I'd kind of just do it informally here, kind of like an intro, just kind of put it out there and be like, this is a norm that we shouldn't have any kind of discomfort around. The more we talk about it, I think the more it becomes normalized and nobody feels like it's anything out of the ordinary. And then knowing this, so if a person, like a boy or a girl, have kind of overcome that boundary with their parent where there wasn't a boundary and now I'm trying to put up a boundary. They can just look at it from the perspective of, I need to understand what my own body does, how I react to how I feel. So I'm building my own emotional intelligence. And in doing that, I am able to build empathy. Because if I know that, I had to go through this period of awkwardness, um, if I meet with other children or other kids my age, or like in my cohort, my peer group, or who end up being younger than me, and for some reason they're looking up to me for guidance, I can encourage non-bullying ideas, right? I can say, well, you know what? When we're going through these kind of stages or transitions in life, it is very awkward and it can be very uncomfortable. But it's important to kind of acknowledge that you're free to do what you need to do with your body to understand your body. And knowing that it's something that everybody's going through builds that empathy already, where we're kind of not teasing, because teasing is usually around discomfort. Like if we don't really know how to react around something, the first thing we do is always how to joke about it, and then we're not really sure like to what point are we getting mean. So it's almost like just testing the waters. But if we already are on the same page where this is something we should celebrate about ourselves, like God made us to understand that heaven's a place. Too much sexual exploration for a long amount of time could probably get exhausting and painful. So it's almost like we already know that heaven is probably a temporary thing. So it's almost like we already have built in us that a happy goal to look forward to outside of anything in the world. So as a whole person, you already exist as a full package, as it were. Like you could have, a job that maybe you don't like. You may have like a limited social circle. Maybe you move to a new country and all you have is yourself. You're already looking forward to something that could be like its own kind of de-stressor as it is. So all these things are they're very hopeful in a way, because then we don't think of, we have to delay gratification for like the rest of our life, because we're cutting like all entertainment, all kind of recreation from our life, because we have an idea that after we die, that's the end of our life. And then we're just going to be in this different world where it's just heaven, right? If we scrap that idea and think my next life after I die is going to be hopefully a better approximation of what my current life is, which is why I'm trying to build a healthy, almost balanced life that's ethical, but includes every aspect of what a human should indulge in. So a little bit of recreation, a little bit of work, a little bit of like spiritual health in whatever way works for you. Like I mentioned, prayer, where sometimes, some days I feel like I need to pray and I'm almost looking forward to it. Other days I'm thinking, well, it is a normal practice that I should have, but on other days I think maybe I'll just read some scripture instead, or maybe I'll meditate on some meanings. So, kind of gauging what works for you, I think, is the best way to step back from wanting to be judgmental about people who want to call themselves Christian or Muslim or Jewish, but don't have a regular practice, or one that's consistent or seemingly consistent, because then it takes away from somebody always having to be like that watch that says, I'm doing this. Why aren't you joining me? Or why don't you do this consistently? Or, right. And then it kind of creates that tension where people aren't comfortable being themselves. And then they tend to be almost two-faced. Like, this is the me when you're not around. And then this is the me when you're around. And I don't know how to tell you that I'm trying to hide parts of me because I feel like you're going to judge me. So, th- learning about boundaries, I guess, is kind of the next step. So, as a parent, like, how would I kind of want to address this with my kid? I don't know because I don't have kids. I wouldn't have known how to address this other than that, knowing that parents, and from what I've seen when I've worked in youth age programs, is that they tend to, as the kids grow up, just give them a lot of space. So it's almost to say, um, and you can probably take hints from different shows. Like, it's almost like, I'm going to allow you uh, maybe this much earned privilege. Like, you're allowed to have friends over, but keep the door open. And then eventually it's okay, we understand. But then the ramifications of if you're going to try an experiment with sex, these are the possible consequences. So make sure you're informed. And anytime you see these interactions, they almost look like they're forced or they're kind of awkward. And I don't remember actually knowing how I would feel around that age because I never had that conversation with my parents. It was almost like you'll figure it out when you get married. And well, since I never got married, it was, well, we just assume you're just kind of whatever, maybe ambivalent towards the whole idea. So, I think sometimes maybe having a family friend talk about it with them. Like, I'm thinking about Dead to Me, where the mother's friend is talking to her son about it just really casually, and he's just like, so it's almost like they might feign disinterest, but they're kind of listening because it's just awkward. Like, how do you talk about it? But it's good insight because we like anecdotes and we like stories and we like to know, how do girls feel and how do boys feel and what's there's no norm because everyone's temperament's different. So it's almost just like it's good to have like an eclectic idea of a lot of different ways that sexual exploration can kind of embody, and then kind of learn to talk about it in a way that hopefully is engaging rather than kind of like interrogative, almost like a checklist where like, so I don't know. I'm gonna leave it at that, kind of short. Hopefully it's something that becomes a comfort that people are able to kind of go into rather than something that they kind of dread. And from there, we can continue to build healthy emotional intelligence.